This ZeroNow program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
In today's world, ensuring the safety of our children is more crucial than ever. But what if security could be seamlessly integrated into the very foundations of our educational institutions? Hear from innovative architects Rebecca Brady and Brian Carter, along with security expert Jeff Morgan, in our conversation, Innovative Building Design for Enhanced School Security. That, let me introduce our panelists. So this is a really incredible group. We have Rebecca Brady. Becky, welcome, from Clark Nexton. Becky, why don't you just give us a quick background in your relation to this topic and your amazing work that you're doing?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. Well, thanks for having me today for this discussion. I think this is a really important topic, and it's a topic that needs to be continually discussed. So really happy to be here and part of this today. As Ara mentioned, I am a senior architect at Clark Nexton. I've been really focused on K-12 education for the past almost 10 years and have taken a deep dive into studying school safety and what does that mean for our students. I am an active member of the Association for Learning Environments, and I have earned my accredited learning environment planner credential recently, and that also has another focus with school safety. My personal tie to this subject is in 2007, I was a student on the Virginia Tech campus at the time of that mass shooting. So I experienced that firsthand. It's something that, you would never wish on anyone. I think of that as my kind of personal mantra, or not mantra, but inspiration for why I'm doing the work that I'm doing today. So there's that. I'm also a mom. I have 2 small kids. So when I send my kids to school, I want them to be in a safe environment, and I want them to go to school and have fun and learn. So thinking about, from the perspective of someone who has experienced a horrific event, but also a mother and also an architect, and I really care about, place and design, and I think that matters a lot. So thinking from those 3 perspectives, that's what really gives me the drive to study school safety.
That is great, Becky. We really appreciate the fact that you're here. And, you mentioned something that underscores the work that we're all doing here. Everyone's part of this program is prevention. How do we prevent harm from happening? And this is an area, like I said, tends to be overlooked, but hopefully this will really shine a light on this as an important factor. Also an architect, Brian Carter. Welcome, Brian.
It's really wonderful to be here. And I echo Becky's comments about how important we feel this discussion is, and how enjoyable it is to share our thoughts together with so many like-minded folks and similarly experienced individuals everywhere. My background is I am an accredited learning environments planner, as is Becky as well, and actually served on the ALEP commission for a number of years, developing the core competencies that define what it means to be a learning environments planner. And I want to talk about that a little bit in a minute, and it's and what school safety and opportunities for security in schools, how they might impact that. I also am an architect. I've spent most of my 30-year career in K-12 and higher education planning and design environments, and it's the issue of school safety and creating healthful learning environments for our students is certainly not new. As long as I've been a member of the professional community, this has been a high priority for ours. And I think the politics of the topics ebb and flow over time, but the importance of creating really wonderful environments for our students, our next generation really of leadership to grow and develop, never goes away. And so I'm really happy to have this discussion with everyone today.
Absolutely. And once again, thank you, Brian, for joining us and sharing your expertise. And Jeff Morgan. Jeff has been a guest on the program in the past, and Jeff is going to be sharing his expertise from his perspective. Jeff, would you mind just providing a quick background on yourself and unmute, of course?
Sure, of course. Thanks, Dara, for the opportunity again to be able to talk about this very important topic. I've got over 25 years now in the security world. Started off my career in the military and the Air Force doing anti-terrorism, force protection, and nuclear security. So, looking at how we protected a lot of our military bases, military installation, also military personnel. I then took a job with the University of Central Florida in Orlando, Florida, one of the largest universities in the country. We had over 70,000 students, 15,000 faculty and staff from all over the world, all over the U.S. I was a director of security and emergency management there. We had a dedicated security management team, a dedicated team of 3 individuals. That happened because we also had an active shooter situation on our campus, and that highlighted the importance of making sure a lot of our security was integrated, was also able to help first responders with getting information that they need for a critical response, and also post event. So as an emergency manager, that's one of the things that we focused on a lot of times was active shooter and how do we utilize our spaces and things like that. Our campus also allowed us to sit in with architects like Brian and Becky to sit in in a room and talk through the design from new construction to major to minor renovations, security design into those different facilities. Facilities such as research labs, classroom buildings, sporting events. We had arenas, stadiums, office buildings, even a medical campus. And I also was involved in our K through 12 schools for the state of Florida through the Regional Domestic Security Task Force, where we focus on target hardening for a lot of our K through 12 schools. When the grant funds came in from the federal government, this was the panel where I was a voting member, and we voted on which projects got funded for different schools to help with security initiatives along the board. After about 11 years at UCF, I took a job with Lending Tree here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Was able to and honored to be able to help them design their brand new headquarters building here in Charlotte. We had 15 offices throughout the United States in major cities. So we had to enhance all of our security programs and our crisis management programs for those sites as well. Both at UCF and at Lending Tree, I was able to help design and build a global security operations center. So all of our security data would come into one location. With Lending Tree, it was also our cyber information that was coming in that we had to build out and learn how to utilize that space during crisis events as well. And now I'm here at Union County Government doing the same thing for our government center, courthouse, our sheriff's office, our business offices. So security is something that I take very important. I've dedicated my life to. Like Becky, I've got 2 kids, both in elementary school, and I know the importance of this. And we see this happen, it seems like monthly on the news, something's happening at another school. So anything we can share and talk about today, I think would be beneficial for other folks to kind of listen to some people that's doing this for a living, and hopefully they can get a lot out of this. Thank you, Aura.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate it. And I just want to remind our participants, if you have a question for Becky, Brian, or Jeff, please hit the Q&A button. We'll take those during the program. We have some questions a little bit halfway through the program from registrants, but if you go ahead and hit the Q&A, we'll answer those. So let's take a look at the poll results here. Oh boy, let's see. So bullying and social isolation and threat of gun violence, active shooter, are the 2 most significant safety issues that students face based on our participants. So that's interesting. And Becky, let's talk about the word safety. How would you define safety?
So I think that's an interesting question. Thanks, Ara. And I think that push poll is really kind of leading. I think it's important to frame the conversation and what it is that we're talking about here. So if we're talking about safety in schools, the way that I'm looking at it is holistically. So I think so often our knee-jerk reaction is safety is about the worst case scenario. It's an active shooter, but it's about so much more than that. And I think the overwhelming response of bullying and social awareness in schools is really telling, as people recognize that is another aspect of safety. But we're also talking about natural disasters, family strife, a number of other things that could play into this conversation of safety. So I think framing this, when we're talking about safety in school, it's important to remember that it is more than the active shooter situation. It's more than that worst case scenario. We want to make sure that we're providing appropriate learning environments for students on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And Brian, how does safety differ from security? Are they one and the same? How would you define security?
Right, and that's a little leading because we were talking about this earlier, and to back up a minute, a discussion we were having is that the poll itself, is a little bit leading in that it's undefined, or it doesn't define what safety means, and yet asks you all as participants to make a determination of what is the greatest safety risk without really determining what that means. And so I appreciate your definition of safety, Becky. To me, safety is a condition within which an individual can grow and develop and build relationships, positive community relationships, and become a whole self, a whole person. Architects like to talk about genus loci, or a spirit of a place that creates a condition that essentially is a safe condition. And as a school planner and designer, I think of safety as exactly that. And the security, to me, we were talking about this earlier too. Actually, Webster's dictionary doesn't necessarily agree with me in the definitions, but when I hear security, I think of security as one of many tools that we have at our disposal to create a safe and healthful environment for our students. Security can be both passive and or active, and can enhance or detract from those sorts of conditions that create a positive spirit of place, or be neutral. And as a planner designer, I think it's really important to distinguish those differences. And then as we're creating a safe environment, we're using the appropriate tools we have at our disposal. For instance of that, I saw in some of the pre-questions from some of our participants today, the topic that I know many people on the call are familiar with, and even experts at, is that the use of the principles of SETTED, for instance. And so there is, to me, a difference in the use of the term safety and security, and I think one is a tool to create the condition of the other.
When I think of security, I think of Jeff Morgan. And so, Jeff, so how would you define security in the context of a learning environment from your experience?
Well, I think it's security, it's going to take on the culture of the environment as well, and I think with security too, there's like Brian said, there's a lot of technology. There's a lot of things that you can do to use use security for, not just for crime prevention type of things as well. At UCF, we use a lot of our security cameras, just kind of be aware of what's going on. To also, when you start talking about like SEPTED, you start thinking about lighting. You start thinking about, when students are walking across the campus during daytime, it's completely different feeling than doing it at nighttime. So how can you kind of utilize security to be able to help them kind of get from one part of the campus to another one safely? So whether that's through using emergency blue light phones, putting security cameras on those blue light phones, lighting of those spaces as well. Just those kind of, aspects is how I kind of view it.
I want to jump in for just a minute because I'm not sure who is in attendance, but just for anyone who may not be familiar with SEPTED, since we did reference it, SEPTED is crime prevention through environmental design. And in short, what that means is we're using our environment to help aid in the safety and security of a school campus.
Brian.
Yeah, might jump in. Oh, this is great. I really appreciated what Jeff said about just the example, like nighttime, getting across a campus safely, and then the addition of like thinking about crime prevention through environmental design, which is what does that really mean? And I want to emphasize that the real importance of the design of the space isn't only getting the student from point A to point B safely. That's that's job one. But I like to say that's like the ticket to the dance, but you're not on the floor yet. To be really successful, you have to create a sense of safety and belonging for that student as the student crosses safely through a passively or actively secure environment. That's the key: is how can we create a spirit of place that allows people that nurtures nurtures their souls, essentially, that allows them to be an included part of the community that they're sharing as they're trafficking across a space. And I think that's really well said.
And Becky, so are there some core principles in architecture or school design that foster those things that Brian is talking about? Are there some core elements that we should be aware of as a very broad general principle?
I think there are, and I think this kind of gets into a larger conversation of dollars. So kind of being fiscally responsible. And I think there were some questions from panelists or from attendees about this as well, as how do you kind of promote this idea of being able to use these principles from SEPTED or from the getting to the dance floor, like Brian said. How do you justify spending money to be able to do that? And I think it really comes down to the fact that the place does matter. The design matters. It really does have a lasting impact on a student. And so having things like glazing in every classroom so that there's natural light, and even having glazing and natural light in a corridor, in a place where you are just getting from point A to point B. If you think about a stairwell, that is typically a place that is more enclosed. It typically doesn't have supervision. It's not as easy to keep eyes on students. So are there opportunities in the design where you can open spaces up that would typically be more enclosed, like a stairwell? So if you're intentionally leaving your doors open, or maybe you don't have doors, if you can have that with your code provisions wherever you might be in the nation, maybe you don't have doors, but maybe you're also allowing lots of natural light to flood in there. And so that's inviting students to use those stairs, and it's a much nicer experience. It's getting to that dance floor rather than just going up a set of metal stairs. Maybe it's this inviting set of stairs where it's promoting mental health, physical health, and safety in your school.
So Jeff, Becky mentioned budget and funding and all that. So how do you add security to a construction project when funding is a challenge?
Sure. And just real quick, or I want to talk a little bit about that SEPTED value there also. So one of the things that we would do whenever we would sit down with the architects and look at the design of a building or a space or a campus was we always took a look at the landscaping as well. So I remember, when you first move into a brand new building, the landscaping is pretty young, everything's kind of growing. And then we had programs where, we would go with our law enforcement officers, our housing folks and things like that, and RAs, and we would walk those buildings or those dormitories at nighttime, and we would make note. And a lot of those times it is trimming back bushes and trees and things like that. So that way, when it does get night, does get dark, there's less places for people to hide, just a little bit more opening for students to kind of walk through, and they felt a little bit more safer whenever we did things like that. So I think landscape design on a building is also just as important. That kind of ties also back to the question you just asked too, Ara, is, there's many times, as a security professional, we wanted to, if we could have everything that we wanted in a building, it would always be ideal, but budget never really allowed us to do that, right? So one of the things that we had to do was we would design it the way the ideal design would look like. And we would work with the architects, our network folks, and our IT folks, and we would know for the budget that we had for that project, what we could do. So we would start off with the key entry locations, probably the large areas where people will gather. Anything that has a value, that's where we would put a lot of our security priorities first. But then if we wanted to do them in hallways and stairwells, like Becky was just talking about, and we may not have the funding for day one, we would at least run the conduit. We would put a box on the wall, put a cover on it. And that way, when we got additional funding, whether it was through grant funds or through university, we could always add those later on, because the most expensive parts of adding new security was going to be having to go through and run conduit, putting all the box or electrical, all those kind of things. So we would have all those runs already done. Sometimes they would even pull the cable and just terminate inside the box, and then all we had to do later on just add the equipment. But we would design it so we can say we can future-proof it for additional dollars later on down the road. With landscaping, we would put our cameras on the buildings at like a medium level, because we can view things above the trees, the brand new trees. But at 2-3 years later, the canopy starts blocking your camera views. So we would start off high, and then we would, as the trees grow, we had another box on the building so we can move that camera right below the tree canopy. And you will work with the architects and the landscape artists, and they will tell you what the growth and what the canopy is going to look like, and they can help you kind of make those kind of decisions as you kind of move along. Because some projects, they got to put so many trees, so many bushes, and things like that in place. So there's an opportunity there to work with folks like that too. So you can kind of future-proof that. So you're going to have to move your camera lower underneath that canopy later on. Just put a box there, run the conduit, and that way it'd be something you can do in the future as well. So just some cost savings there, just some ideas.
Yeah, no doubt. And Brian, Jeff mentioned a few times about working with architects, and who is typically at the table, like when you work with a school. So Brian, is most of the work that you do, is it all new construction, or do you retrofit existing schools typically?
Say yes to all of that. Lot of new construction. These days, there's more and more. I think nationally, we have such an inventory nationally of existing facilities that are in dire need of modernization, and especially in our urban settings, which also tend to be the settings that have a I'll call it a more durable perimeter. We are doing more and more modernization work, and I think that's very common across the nation. But what was your question specifically?
So, are school boards saying, okay, we're going to fund
who we work with?
And are they thinking from a safety perspective, and and who's at the table, and how do you bring those people to the table when a new project is approved?
Yeah, that's really the key to. Becky and I talked about learning environments planning in particular, and I said I wanted to talk about the core competencies a little. Core competency number 2 is about community engagement. Schools and I think all learning environments. I put colleges, universities also, the K-12 especially. These facilities are really the heartbeat of our local communities, our neighborhoods, right? Very often across the nation, you need, zoning permit in order to put a school where it naturally wants to be, because there's a lot of zoning across the nation that doesn't include schools because they're too big for areas that are zoned residential, right? But that's where they need to be. So this is kind of a long way around, like, who's at the table. The short answer is everybody's at the table if you're being successful, and so we typically work with members of the community, with parents, with teachers and administrative staff at the facility, with district level leadership, with the students, with first responders in the local community, both fire, police, in order to ensure that they can effectively respond to any number of conditions that they need to respond to, and with leadership at the district level, including the school board. And it's important to get those varieties of voices on the table and to understand each group's needs and aspirations in order to create a solution, that essentially works for everyone. And we're able to create a facility that becomes the heartbeat of the neighborhood itself. That's the key.
I know I'm in Loudoun County, Virginia, and I think our last election last week, there were 2 new schools that were on for bond, and I know they both passed. And so I'm just wondering, are schools thinking from this? Is it common practice now for schools to focus on the actual architecture from a design perspective regards to safety?
Absolutely. It's a conversation that everybody's having these days. So I think it's really at the forefront of people's minds, especially in light of what's been happening more frequently in schools, which is that worst case scenario. So school safety is a high priority, I think, for schools across the nation.
Brian.
Yeah, or certainly, if not what's been happening more frequently, what is with today's with our national attention and instant media, like our live stream on LinkedIn, that we all are so aware of what's happening. I was thinking to that question that one of the things that we're responding to with you mentioned your local bond is the desire on the parts of communities to create a safer environment for their students, or at least to perceive a safer environment for their kids. It's one of the greatest concerns in our communities today, and we're seeing that even to the point that larger districts that put programs together and ask for money from their communities that have multiple major school facilities. Maybe their real challenge is that they need seats, like maybe they're over capacity and they need new schools if it's a large district, something like that. We are seeing portions of the program revenue that are allocated to creating higher levels of security in existing schools in order to accommodate the desires of the community that are going to be voting. And it's an interesting trend right now, because the idea, what we're seeing a lot is like add a vestibule to existing schools. Everyone wants to add a vestibule to an existing school. And Becky even has a great article that I think you've provided to your viewers on focused entry. But it's interesting because, as we know, a single vestibule doth not a panacea make, right? I mean, it's not like suddenly our facility is far safer for our students because we've created some sort of secure facility up front. And so it's a question that we have to listen to our communities. We also have to provide the guidance and leadership for a balanced solution that makes responsible use of those limited funds.
Becky, please.
Yeah, I think that's why those community engagement opportunities are so important, because people come in with these ideas. They might have these preconceived notions of this is the way to approach it. But once you are in a room and you can hear different perspectives, so one person may be thinking one thing, but somebody else may be thinking something completely different. So when you're in that room and you can hear from another parent or a student or a teacher or an administrator or a janitorial staff or a community member, whoever it may be, being able to be in that same room and hear and learn from each other, there may be a solution that comes out that is more appropriate overall, rather than what someone may come into that meeting thinking initially.
And so, Brian, I'll direct this to you, and then we've got a bunch of questions that are coming in, and especially for Jeff. What would you advise a superintendent, for example, right, that's considering, okay, we have a 70-year-old school, and we would like to take some steps to build in enhanced security, safety by design. What would you recommend? Are there any like actionable steps you could take right now for an older building?
Sure. I mean, thinking just of the facility, I think obviously we can think of, there's a lot of different facilities and different design solutions to those old facilities. And so it would be dependent on that. An old kind of Beaux-Arts school of the 30s in an urban setting probably has more kind of, lack of viewpoints or observation points, things like that in it. And old double-loaded corridor, but say call it a California quality type high school that has a lot of outside circulation might have a different set of conditions and need different solutions. But I would like to start the discussion with the superintendent about their programs and how the facility helps to support and enhance their teaching and learning curricula and the pedagogical approach to that curricula, and then see what we can do to create an environment that is more inclusive and provides those points. I think we were talking earlier about just transparency in order to see and be seen and understand what's happening, and then work from there on how to create passive controls so that the safety experts can do their job and do what they need to do in response to whatever the crisis might be.
And we talk about older schools. I know our local middle school is like a bunker. And Jeff Kelly, one of our ZeroNow advisors and member, asked, with K-12 schools notorious for being bunkers, this makes radio communication sometimes impossible from inside to outside. What steps, and this is for you, Jeff Morgan, what steps do you take to ensure a first responder's walkie-talkie can speak back to dispatch? Do you speak with communication experts along these lines? So when you have a limited, when you have a bunker type environment, how does technology work in that, wireless technology?
Sure, that's always going to be a big challenge, right? Especially a lot of the older buildings. I know in Florida, even some in a window tent that's put up there will even block cellular and block Wi-Fi, block radio activity from coming in. So one of the things that we did, I'm not sure about the K through 12s, but they could utilize the same method there, is before a construction project started, let's say we were going to put a building between these other two buildings. Our radio shop would go through the two existing buildings with a radio analyzer and spectrum analyzer and actually get all the readings so they can see what the current status of the of those facilities are from a communication standpoint, from Wi-Fi, those kind of things. Because a lot of our laboratories, a lot of our research labs and classrooms, everything is wireless. It was amazing to me when he showed me how much things are running from our sprinkler systems to regular communications, how to monitor the electricity power, all those kind of things, all wirelessly, things that a lot of people don't think about. But they would then design the new building and they would place it there. And what they would do with the budget inside that project was, if that new building got put up and it overshadowed another facility and that facility was downgraded because of that building being built in that space, budget would come out of that existing building that they're building to increase that the capability of the existing building to kind of match where it was before or even better. So we made sure that was definitely, I guess, a forethought as we designed and we kind of walked through and that a newer building was going to impact not just communication for first responders, but also the capability of that building. Because, a lot of these students these days with smartwatches, tablets, laptops, they carry all kinds of wireless things with them, and we want to make sure they can still function in those spaces, like Brian was saying, to help with education and office work and stuff like that. But that was one of the things that we did. What we also did was we knew that we had some facilities that we partnered with AT&T, we partnered with other cellular companies that helped. And they would bring in these distributed antenna systems throughout the facilities, and they would have a public safety network in there that could also tie and be a repeater for those radio systems. And in our campus, we actually bought a repeater. So when we had a major event at, let's say, like a presidential event at our arena, we had the same kind of repeater that the first responders would have. We would put it inside that facility before an event and turn it on, because when you have 70, 80,000 people inside of a facility, those are some of the challenges you face. So we would just kind of prepare for those kind of things. But that's kind of how we addressed it. Aura.
Brian, thoughts on
that? I was thinking, yeah, that was great. Thanks, Jeff. There's a little irony in that question itself, in that the the school facilities, I think, across the nation that are least receptive to current understanding and teaching and learning and current pedagogical approaches are also the facilities that perform the worst for communication, first responder communication internally. It's like you say, that bunker, it's that hardened facility, and it's the old we call it the cells and bells, the double loaded corridor kind of condition that operate the worst. I know in Washington State and Oregon State as well, where I personally have done most of my career's work. We have distributed antenna requirements, and so that is built in the budget. But the kind of the nice irony to it is that schools that are being thoughtful about a biophilic connection between the students and the environments that are using principles of SEPTED for their layers of secure perimeter, that are thoughtfully laying out learning communities that have access to south facing windows and good northern light and those sorts of things, also happen to become these kind of facilities of what I use the term a lot, variegated edges, that also perform best in that environment. And so I think one of the things we can do to make sure that we're communicating well with modern electronics is just to make sure that we're creating environments that allow us to communicate well and to come together as individuals, as people. And it seems like it's a really good marriage.
Well, on the note of technology, Becky, I mean, what role does technology have when it comes to building design? Like Jeff mentioned the cameras, right? Having cameras at a certain level, anticipating the growth of shrubbery, like internally hallways, visibility, with cameras and such. I mean, what role does that have, and how do you bring that into consideration when designing safe schools?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think as Brian mentioned, in a different respect, it varies from school to school. It might vary from district to district. People may have separate thoughts on how to approach this and what's the best way to implement technology in order to support safety in a school. I've had some conversations with folks that believe that having cameras in a building is kind of borderline too much information, because then you're watching students all the time, and is that appropriate? So I think there's always going to be multiple sides to this argument. In a lot of the projects that I work on, we have cameras that are within the schools. We're working with risk assessment that is part of the district to determine where the best places for those cameras should be located, what kind of camera they are, whether it's a 360, what areas they need to focus on. Typically it's corridors, stairwells, places of movement where you don't have that supervision, kind of what we were talking about before with the stairwells, and opening those up, giving more natural supervision. So if you have that in there, then maybe you need less cameras. But then all of those cameras that are implemented typically go back to a command center, which would be maybe located in an admin area, where if there is a situation and people needed to go to that room and have that command center, then you would have all of that video footage available as well.
Well, what's interesting, with cameras and command centers, and most schools, especially due to funding, don't have the resources to have somebody monitor cameras, and that's why using technology like artificial intelligence, gun detection, and we always talk about creating an invisible fortress around the school. You've got cameras, humans are not watching them 24/7, but you have, they're looking for objects. And Jeff, when I visited Jeff at University of Central Florida years ago, when I saw the video monitor, the command center, that was impressive, like thousands of video feeds, and using technology to augment humans' ability to be able to identify threats. And I know we talk, this is not, specific about, one type of threat, but this is all hazards, but utilizing technology strategically to be able to identify threats early on, and then you use technology to automate response, like Jeff Kelly mentioned about, getting first responders on a communications channel, creating that that command, unified command as quickly as possible is critical. I recently had a conversation with a superintendent that believed that the biggest step that he made in the district was to have a single entry point with a vestibule, so everyone entering the building comes through this one entrance. They're contained in an area before they're allowed to enter the building. Is that enough? I mean, is creating a protocol like that enough, Brian?
I think, well, everything is too much and everything's not enough, but this is an intractable challenge. I will say, I feel like the single point of entry is a really interesting topic right now. I mentioned the movement as a panacea to community fears to add a vestibule on it. I think of that Portlandia skit, if you all are fans of that show, put a bird on it, and it solves everything. It doesn't. It is interesting, and I'm an advocate for creating a single point of entry at our school facilities, but there are prices you pay with that, and challenges as well. When you create a single point of entry, if that becomes a secure entry point, which a lot of school districts do, especially urban school districts, it becomes locked after the school bell rings, and you have to buzz yourself in. Well, you're creating a Sally Port environment that buzzes like a police station at the start of school. And you might be doing this in urban environments where we're particularly focused on how do we create welcoming environments for our Black and African American students, especially boys and men. There's a lot of data that's showing like how do we recapture that disadvantaged population and provide a pathway for success through school with them, and then we're creating a front door environment that we're trying to say, welcome, this is your community. And there's some great programs about this. You all might be familiar with like the King's program that originated out in California. And the students are arriving at school and they're being faced with a sensory arrival sequence that feels a lot like a police station to them. So that's negative, and we have to be thoughtful about, okay, how does that work? It's also putting someone in administration at the school in the position of being responsible for making the determination of, is that person at the front door safe to be let in? And so there's baggage with that. And the last thing that I really worry about with securing a perimeter is the loss of the porosity of the building. I replaced a high school in a rural community that the community felt had a lot of safety risk to the students because it was a bunch of disparate buildings. They even had parking kind of in between some of the buildings as it had been built over time. There were a lot of challenges to it. And so they wanted a single building that they could secure and that sort of thing. But I had a great community member who talked about, he was actually a graduate and his kids were going to school there now. And he said, one of the great things about our culture is that we all know each other and people come and go all day long from classroom to classroom, from space to space. They didn't have a good commons or cafeteria area. And so a lot of the kids would as high school eat at their cars. And so there's all these safety risks, but there was also this wonderful culture about it. And he described the school as our school inhales and exhales students all day long. And it was kind of a beautiful thing to think about that porosity and what that created. And so those are some of the challenges that we have to think about when we're building a secure perimeter, thinking only of the perspective, the very valid perspective of how do we make sure a bad guy doesn't get in. Right. And
yeah, no. And you mentioned culture. That's something that comes up quite often. And And just as all three of you and the ZeroNow community, we embrace a holistic approach. It's not just throw this single entry vestibule in your school and you're done. Congratulations. There's not just one factor, but there are the cultural factors, right, of creating safe learning environments and knowing that it's okay to say something if there's something of concern, if somebody's planning on doing something bad or hurting themselves. But also cultural things like holding the door open for somebody behind you, even if it's a secure entrance and you've got all the security in the world. If you don't feel comfortable shutting the door behind you and there's a stranger behind you and asking them to buzz in or speak to the front desk, then that's a factor. So that's a human factor that you can't solve with technology. Jose Figueroa, hello, Jose. So Jose asks, and this is more of a comment. He's looking for commentary here, but most parents, and Jeff, I'll direct this to you as a parent as well, and Becky and Brian, feel free to jump in. Most districts don't realize that parents have the right to ask school boards for their security plans and request answers in allocating budget to safety, right? And there's also, we always one of the factors is there is funding. There's plenty of school safety funding that exists. In fact, Matthew McConaughey launched a new nonprofit, the Greenlight program, when he realized that there's so much federal funding for school safety initiatives, but most schools are just not aware of that. So most people don't know that they have the right to really petition the school board and request the school boards to allocate funding and prioritizing safety. Jeff, is there anything that you would recommend to Jose and to our participants, things that the parents can do when it comes to being advocate to the schools?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. I think to answer that question, I think you got to also be mindful, I guess, of what the parents are asking for. So, it depends on, I know at least in Florida State and here in North Carolina, emergency plans, security plans are secure documents. Those aren't to be publicly released to folks. So when we work with the architects, sometimes we'll have a different page just with all those kind of design that's built into those as well. But, I know with ZeroNow, we have an initiative there where we produce documents for parents to and give them key questions that they can ask principals and boards, school districts and boards on what they're doing about safety, what they're doing about bullying, what are they doing about security for those schools. And those are, I think, the right kind of questions to definitely ask for when you want to focus on the safety and security of the students at a K through 12 school or even a university, because you're right, I mean, a lot of parents don't know what questions to ask, but when we can provide those parents with those kind of tools, it becomes very beneficial. I can tell you, as a security person, budget's always going to be tight. It's always going to be something that we had to look for. We got to look for grant funds. A lot of the K through 12 schools got to do the same kind of initiatives when they want to do things. But when the students are asking for it and when the parents are making the requests, it gets a lot of attention. And a lot of times, I know even at UCF, we had some of the students, they would petition for more security blue light phones or more whatever security initiatives that they wanted, and they would get it. They would get the provost would find the funding, and they would fund it, and then it would go there because a lot of times that gets a lot of attention in the media, gets a lot of attention to campus from the different parents, and it could be an initiative, I guess, a way to help kind of increase security. So if you want to change that culture, like Brian was talking about, and help secure funds and bring up the I guess the importance of that for your school. There's a method of doing that way as well.
Becky.
That's a great answer, Jeff. I really love that. And I just want to reiterate that if you have a question as a parent, don't be afraid to ask it. When you go to your kids' schools, pay attention to, what is that entry sequence and what is it like as you're walking through? What is that culture? And if there's something that seems awry or amiss, don't be afraid to talk to a teacher or a principal or a school board member, whoever might be appropriate. I think that's a very valid.
And Jose also followed up, and so he's referring to the folks that are in charge of security. And one of the things, how does someone in charge of security get the buy-in from school boards to allocate additional funds? And Jose, one of the things that we've really discovered over the last couple of years with the ZeroNow community is that how many districts don't have a single dedicated person in charge of security for a district. And that is really a starting point when we talk about, what are some concrete things that school districts can do, superintendents, school boards, is to hire a director of school safety and security, someone who owns this, someone who's sitting at the table with Brian and Becky talking about, here are some of the needs that we have, and that's something critical. We're going to be focused on that. And Jeff, you pointed out, so one of the things also is kind of give everyone a preview of something that we're working on right now with the ZeroNow community is this path to zero, which really takes a very high level, holistic approach, concrete things that schools can do now. It's not getting in the weeds. This is not like, a deep checklist, but very high level. Because one of the things that we've discovered also in the last couple of years is that school districts, superintendents, principals, school boards have been given this big box full of puzzle pieces, right? Say, here you go, and make our school safe. But if you don't have the top of that box that shows you what this looks when everything is put together, how can you make decisions on how to put those pieces together? So really helping in that process, and that's really what the path is designed to do. So that's something that we're going to be working on. We have just 5 minutes. I want to take a couple of questions that came in online, and there's a couple that came in. And by the way, if we don't get to all the questions, once you're done with this program, if you go to the ZeroNow community, just go to zeronow.org, click on community. Brian, Jeff, and Becky can respond to your questions on there, and you can continue to ask additional questions. This video audio will be available next week. But I'm going to take a couple of last questions when we have a couple more minutes here. So Vivian from Georgia Tech Police Department asks, and actually this is similar to Jose's question. So what are some ways to get buy-in during the architectural phase to incorporate SEPTED practices? Are schools thinking of that? I mean, are they thinking SEPTED when, like, the schools here, 2 new schools? Are they thinking SEPTED when they're going to RFP? Brian.
SEPTED's interesting because it's very, in many ways, very broad, the principles. I think I first worked with SEPTED in the early 2000s, and I first presented on SEPTED at an A4 League conference in like 2004. So it's been around a long time, and there are some groups, including school districts and universities especially, and college campuses, that already have a lot of expertise and understanding. So there's not a lot of buy-in needed. It's like the conversations naturally begin around SEPTED. In smaller communities, I think that's our responsibility as planners and designers, is to bring that to the table, and it's also our responsibility if we don't have in the community that we're serving, as consultants, if we don't have a Jeff Morgan sitting there or being nearby, that we need to encourage that expertise needs to be a voice at the table for them.
Absolutely. Time for one more question. Becky, I'll direct this to you. So Richard asks, how do you factor in handicap or other sensory challenges along with the safety security requirements in school design and or modifications?
Yeah, those are equally important. And I think Brian said the word inclusion earlier, and making sure that every single student and parent and staff member that walks into that school has all of the safety factors that they need, including American Disability Act, ADA things that are required per code. It's got to be a top priority. So those are things that are absolutely baked into the process of modifications or modernizations or new school construction.
Absolutely. And is there anything that we can do as parents? I know we Jeff touched upon this, but to ensure that our schools or our districts are implementing these modern safety design principles. Any recommendations? Is there any sort of standard for school safety design? I'm sure that they're like ADA, obviously, but safety specific. Brian,
I would say, and this is a difficult thing to implement, but what we can do as parents. By the way, I'm a parent of students also, only they were students long ago, and one of my student children actually returned to the schoolhouse just last year to pursue a career in teaching, and she teaches middle school, so she's back in it. And so So my perspective on that question, probably similar to you guys, is the best thing we can do as parents is to parent well with our children, to be aware of their social emotional well-being, to be participants in their learning cycle and at their schools. There might be some specifics that our parents, any individual parent, learns about the school environment in order to make the kinds of kind of specific recommendations you're talking about, Ara. But more important than that to me is that sort of participation, it becomes foundational to all of our understanding of, okay, how do we shape these environments now and in the future for greater success.
Thanks, Brian. We are completely out of time, but I just would like to get just final thoughts and words of wisdom from each of you. Becky, we'll start with you. Any parting thoughts that you'd like to share with our participants?
I think my final thought would be, this is a multifaceted conversation. There is no one right answer. There is no one right solution. Continue to have the conversation, continue to be open to others' perspectives, and let's all keep learning together.
Absolutely. Jeff Morgan, final thoughts for our participants.
I think it's very important as we kind of move forward and we see what's happening in different schools. We kind of learn what's happening at these other schools too, and kind of adjust to it. There's a lot of new technology that are out there that can make things very simple for a lot of our administration folks to keep kids safe in school. And I just want to thank you, Ara, again, for the opportunity and to be able to talk about this important subject. So thank you for this time.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Brian, words of wisdom, sir.
Do good things, go forward and conquer. We have wonderful school systems, actually, and there's always this concern that I think is kind of a natural part of kind of social anxiety. But in the end, participate in your school communities as a parent or as a neighbor, and that will help us to plan the appropriate solutions for those communities. And there will always be a component of active and passive security systems that are a part of creating a safe and welcoming environment that allow our students to thrive. And I think if we have continue these conversations and have open dialogue, then we'll have the right conversations on individual school projects as we move forward in the future.
Definitely. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Becky, Brian, and Jeff. I think we learned a lot today, so we'll carry this forward, and we'll see you guys on the community. Take care. Stay safe.